Thank you all very much for joining today. As I said earlier, we are here today to talk about the Expat Guide to Divorce Masterclass series. This is, I think, the fourth or fifth episode I've had so far. And the objective really is to run through some of the most common challenges that expats face during divorce and to try and share some of my insights based on my experience and the time I've spent working with many, many clients in this situation to avoid making those mistakes that end up costing a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of stress. So the topic for today's session is things to consider when you're trying to choose the best jurisdiction for your divorce. This is today's, just like every other session, is meant to be an interactive session. This is an opportunity for you to ask me questions, to engage with me, to try and get the knowledge you need to be able to make informed decisions. So please don't hesitate. Feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat or to come off mute and to participate. I'm more than happy to answer any questions as they come up. So before we dive into the topic at hand, I want to give you all a little bit of background. So just, I guess, to make sure that you're in the right place, but in terms of the logic behind this course and who it's been designed for. The primary audience here is for people who are either going through divorce or considering divorcing and who live as expats. And when I say expats, it could be that you have moved abroad with your spouse or soon to be ex to a third country, or that you have followed your spouse to their home country or they have come to yours. In any scenario where there is that kind of international element, definitely when the two spouses are from different countries, but even if they've lived in different countries or the children are born in certain countries that are not their original of the countries of origin from the parents, then there may be a question around where you can divorce. And that means that you have a choice in terms of the country where you can apply. And as you probably know already, it isn't the same set of rules and the same approach in every single country. The objective behind a lot of the tips that I share is to help you to divorce with less conflict. And that means that you can divorce faster, you can spend a lot less money on lawyers, and you can make the whole experience a lot less stressful for everyone and definitely less negative for your children. So if you're interested in setting yourself up for a successful divorce and to make sure that your children and yourselves are not suffering from this transition, you're in the right place. This is exactly the intent behind all of the advice and tips that I share and the work that I do with my clients. So the reason I organized this masterclass is because as I was speaking to people, prospective clients, other professionals, I could see that there were a lot of misunderstandings. And there's a lot of hearsay out there. There's a lot of rumors and ideas that people have, whether they're based on the media or on what they hear from their friends. The reality is that it's quite hard these days, based on all the information that you find on social media, etc., to be clear about what is true and what's not. And so I wanted to kind of provide a single version of the truth so that you know that you're getting advice that comes from a trained professional, somebody who knows what they're talking about and applies to your specific kind of scenario, and that you're not going off the back of stuff that you found online that's not necessarily reliable, or information that friends and family may have shared with the best of intentions, but that may be obsolete or inapplicable to you. The belief I have behind all of this is that the more information you have, and of course it has to be accurate information, the better equipped you are to be able to make these decisions. So in sharing this knowledge, I want to really empower you to make decisions that are the right ones for you and for your family. There is no one size fits all. Every divorce is different because every family is different. So there is no rule book that's going to tell you exactly what's the best jurisdiction for you or any of the other decisions that you have to make in your divorce. They're all relevant to your specific case, and they need to be made based on where you stand, the context of your family, your personal objectives, your values, etc. But I'm giving you the information to be able to make those decisions and overlay those personal elements. Now, you probably know this, but a lot of the decisions we make during divorce result in orders by a court, and those become very difficult to change later on. So a lot of the decisions we make from the choice of jurisdiction, but throughout the entire divorce, are usually long-term decisions. There's sometimes options to vary these decisions later on, but as you can imagine, it takes time, it's costly, and a lot of people don't really want to reopen old wounds. It's just one more unpleasant thing to revisit. So if you can get it the first time, then it's always an asset and it allows you to then move on with your life after the divorce and not have to constantly revisit it because you realize you've made mistakes or forgotten things. So the choice of jurisdiction is an obvious one, where you'd like to ideally get it right from the beginning and to be able to then proceed with the divorce without having to have a challenge around the jurisdiction or to deal with any complexity with regard to where to file. For those of you who don't know me, I'll take a couple minutes to introduce myself. So my name is Chloe, and I'm a certified divorce coach. And that means that I'm specifically trained on negotiation techniques and on alternative dispute resolution methods. So what I do is I work with my clients to help them to divorce out of court with as little conflict as possible. And I help them prepare for every step of the divorce process so that they feel in control. So it doesn't feel like their divorce is happening to them, but they're able to have the divorce they want, but also the life afterwards that they want. And so through learning skills, de-escalation, for example, they're able to manage the process in the best possible way. I myself am an expat. My mother is American, my father is French. I was born and raised in Paris, but I've been here in the UK for 17 years. It says 15, but it's out of date actually. It's now been 17 years, and I have two daughters. I'm myself divorced. I got divorced as an expat living in the UK with somebody who was also a foreigner, not a British citizen. And I had that firsthand experience, and I now have the experience of co-parenting across border since my ex has moved back to France. So a lot of the things I talk about also are relevant with regards to my own experience as well as the experience of my clients. So in terms of how I bring all of this together, and the reason why I decided to become a divorce coach is because I really wanted to help people to avoid making the big mistakes that I made. And I'm always saying I wish so much that I had had a coach when I was getting divorced who could really guide me through the process and avoid me making those mistakes, make sure that I was paying attention to the things that really matter and that are going to create problems later on, and just have someone by my side as my thinking partner to make the hundreds of decisions that come up during divorce. So to do that, I really combine two different skills. The first is my personal experience, which I touched upon. But aside for having been an expat divorce, it was also a very rural experience in that I originally divorced quite amicably with my ex-husband. We shared a lawyer at the time in France. You could share a lawyer, and we got to work within a few months, very minimal cost. Stayed on good terms. We weren't best of friends, but we were able to collaborate to take care of the kids. And he lived down the street, and the kids saw him very regularly. We interacted on a regular basis, and it was all going fairly smoothly. What happened is that a few years later, he met somebody new, and his approach to our relationship shifted quite significantly. And this kind of culminated with him moving abroad after about 5 years of us having managed the co-parenting relationship. He suddenly moved abroad without any warning and refused to speak to me, and all of our interactions had to happen through lawyers, which, as you can imagine, cost us both an absolute fortune, and it took a lot of time, and it created a huge amount of stress. Most importantly, I saw the impact that it had on our ability to work together for our kids. Well, at the beginning, after the initial divorce, we weren't hanging out or spending quality time together, but we were able to get together for the children's birthdays, for Christmas, and we were able to work together on raising our children. After the litigated version of our divorce, that communication completely broke down. The trust broke down. And the main victims in all of this were our children, because we weren't able to collaborate and to co-parent them in an efficient way. So when I say that amicable divorce is better than litigated divorce, I speak from experience and from the many experiences I've seen as well with my clients. But I know firsthand what that feels like, what that looks like, and the damage that it causes. So I use that personal experience and overlay it with my professional training as a certified divorce coach and my many years of experience supporting people through these similar kind of scenarios, every one of them with their own story, but all of them struggling to try and keep things as peaceful as possible to avoid basically a legal quagmire. And so by using that training and that experience and overlaying it with my own experience, I can really support my clients in helping them avoid those mistakes and making sure that they're aware of the common pitfalls and of some of the things that I didn't anticipate or some of the clients didn't anticipate and then came back to bite them later on. So as I kind of hinted, my philosophy is centered around five main pillars. First of all, I am a huge believer in planning things out, in having some control over the process so that things aren't happening to you despite or despite you basically, but that they're all based on a plan and a strategy that you have been able to consider, think through, and really analyze before you proceed. So having a plan is essential. Of course, putting your children at the center of your considerations, your own and of course your soon to be ex, could really, you could both be focusing on what's for the children. And I think that's often said, but it's very easy to forget. I remember forgetting myself, and I've seen many of my clients do the same because you get caught up in the turmoil and it becomes a situation of them versus you. You lose track of the children. And so making sure that the children are at the center but not in the middle of the divorce is really important. Another element that I touch upon throughout all of my columns and in my upcoming book is the importance to thinking long term. A lot of people get divorced and have a lot of things going on, a lot of decisions to make, and they are making decisions based on their current context. And sometimes that's all you can really think of at that stage because there's just too much overwhelm. But actually, as I said earlier, the agreements that you're going to reach are going to be long-term agreements. They're going to be really hard to change later on, and they can impact your life for years to come, depending on the children's age, for example. So try as much as possible to think about what happens later on when the children grow up, if you meet somebody new, all of those elements that might come and disrupt the arrangements you're making today. And if you can, anticipate them. So a typical example is that if you are a serial expat and that every 4 or 5 years you're moving abroad to a new country for your job, you know that's going to happen. That's something you can anticipate in your agreements. And you may not know where you're going next, but you know that there's going to be a point where you're just not all going to be in the same country. And you can build into your agreements all of those considerations to avoid having to renegotiate everything at that stage. I'm a big believer that conflict is not necessary in the context of divorce. Divorce is often portrayed as a very binary process with a winner and a loser, and a very high conflict approach. And it doesn't have to be. There's always going to be some conflict because there's going to be disagreements, and usually this is the person you're negotiating with is not your favorite person in the world. So you have to acknowledge that there will be disagreements. There will be things you can't really discuss without it going in the wrong direction. But if you can keep that conflict to the minimum, then you can move on faster and you can avoid all of the stress and upset that comes from divorce. And what that requires is collaboration and communication. So again, without needing to be best of friends with your ex, it doesn't mean that you're singing Kumbaya and spending every Saturday night together. All it means is that you're able to shift your relationship from a romantic partnership to a parenting partnership. And that's where you want to be focusing your efforts at this stage, to be able to work together as effective co-parents if you have children, of course. So by limiting the conflict and the amount of disruption that comes from your divorce, you should be able to reduce the cost of the divorce because you won't be paying as much in legal fees. You'll reduce the stress. It'll all be a lot easier for everybody involved. And ultimately, you'll get better outcomes because you'll be able to make decisions that are not based on emotion or resentment, but that are based on facts and a calm, level-headed review of the facts in front of you. So, as a divorce coach, I work with my clients throughout the divorce process, really from very beginning when people are just considering getting divorced, all the way to 5, 10 years after they've divorced, and things change, and they need to rethink their co-parenting agreements, or they need to change something in their previous arrangements, and then they need to come to me at that stage. For the purposes of this course, of course, we're really focusing on the first two elements on this slide, which are the logistical and emotional preparation for divorce, and thinking about all the decisions that you need to make from the very beginning to the very end. Now, the following slide is one that I share, even though it seems fairly obvious, but it's important to point it out, and I think that's why I want to take the time to do this. People often think of divorce as a legal process. And yes, of course, there's a legal element, but the legal side is really the administration. Divorce is a life transition. It has an impact on your children, on your work, on your person, on your friendships, on your family. It has so many more implications than just the legal side. And the mistake that a lot of people make is that they treat it purely as a legal process, therefore expecting their lawyer to also be the CEO of that divorce. The reality is that divorce starts way before the legal process does, sometimes years before anyone even makes a decision to divorce, as the marriage is potentially falling apart. That divorce process is already starting because you're already considering what it might look like. You're already starting to think about what your life might look like without the other person. So even when you get to that point where you've decided, it's still not a legal process. It's still a personal journey. You need to tell your spouse that you want a divorce. You need to tell your children that you're getting a divorce, people around you. And you need to build a team of professionals that are going to support you throughout the process for the legal bits and the non-legal bits. Of course, when the legal process begins, then you get really into the nitty-gritty of the process itself, the proceedings. But that's not all that happens in divorce. And that process can take very long. Some people spend years getting a divorce, or it can be quite fast if you're able to collaborate and to just have honest, respectful conversations with your ex. So that process takes whatever amount of time it takes, but it always eventually comes to an end. At some point, you will be divorced. It may not be on the basis of agreements you're very happy with, but you will have a divorce finalized at some point. And again, this is a point where a lot of people forget that divorce isn't finished when you sign the papers. Everyone at that stage needs to find a new modus operandi. They need to find a new way of working together, a new way of living, potentially as a single parent. For some people, it means going back to work when they haven't been working for a while. It means learning to co-parent with your ex, despite all the hard feelings that you might have. It means that children are getting used to this new life, potentially shuttling through from one parent to the other. So the whole readaptation phase is one where people often underestimate. And in a lot of cases, the family, the friends, the lawyers who were around during the legal process are usually demobilized at that stage. There's a sense of, okay, well, your divorce is over now. Let's all move on with our lives. But actually, that process of moving on can take quite a while. And for a lot of people, it requires support. So really what I'm trying to convey here is that divorce is so much more than the legal elements. And the coaching that I provide and the advice that I provide is really based on that whole picture. Because for you as an individual going through divorce, it's all your life. It doesn't matter which bit is legal, which bit is personal, which bit relates to your children. This is your life we're talking about, and it encompasses everything relating to divorce, not just the legal administration of it. So what makes the difference between people who manage to divorce successfully? And again, success is a very subjective term, and everybody needs to find their own version of success when they start their divorce. Being able to get the divorce you want and to especially get the life that you want after that divorce requires three main ingredients. First of all, you need to be prepared. So you need to be going into the process with your eyes wide open, attend sessions like this one, read articles, speak to professionals, all of that to be able to make sure that you understand what the process looks like, what the impact on your life might look like, how you'll need to support your children, all of those different elements of preparation. The second ingredient is mindset. People have a lot of misconceptions about divorce. I mentioned earlier this idea that there's a winner and a loser, for example. That's a typical shift that needs to happen. Actually, in a divorce, everybody loses because by definition, you're splitting things up. So there's not going to be a winner. What you want to make sure is that your children aren't the losers. And so shifting that mindset is really, really important. And then the third element is support. So making sure that you're surrounded by the right people, even if it's your friends and family, that they're people who are not making things worse and contributing to the feuds with your ex. On the professional front, making sure that you have the right professionals, the right categories of professionals. Also within those categories, someone who is aligned to your philosophy, who works in a way that works for you. So those are really the three elements, and I work with my clients on all three of those to allow them to achieve their goals. Because when you're divorcing, especially if you're the decision maker, you're doing it because you have the hope of a better life. And that's where we want to get you at the end of all this. So I want to take a minute to share the story of one of my clients, and I've changed her name. Her name is not Emily, but she is a French citizen. She was living in the UK, and she came to see me having spent about, I think it was 9 months, there you go, on negotiating with her husband the terms of their divorce. So they both agreed to divorce, but they couldn't agree on how and what it meant in practice. She'd spent an absolute fortune in lawyers and gotten nowhere. And she was basically stuck. And when she came to see me and we started unpicking her story, it became really obvious that it all went pear-shaped when she filed for divorce. Because she had a choice of jurisdiction, she could divorce in France or in the UK. She did absolutely the right thing in that she spoke to lawyers in all those different countries, both of those countries, to understand which country was most advantageous to her and what made sense in terms of her filing. Should she file in France or in the UK? The lawyer she spoke to told her that the UK would be more advantageous to her and was very concerned about her spouse filing first in France. And so the lawyer's advice was to file as soon as possible in the UK without informing her spouse, because that would allow her to secure the British jurisdiction. And so she did that, even though she didn't feel like it was very right. And I think her instincts were telling her that actually she ought to be just having a conversation with her husband before filing. But because she had received this professional guidance, she decided to trust what she was being told. And so she went ahead and filed for divorce in the UK. And her husband received an email from the court a few days later informing him that she had asked for a divorce. And that's when it all went pear-shaped. Because imagine the reaction of this poor husband who gets an email, an official email from the court in a foreign country, telling him that his wife is asking for a divorce. They're living in the same house and she hasn't even told him anything. How is that conducive to a good collaboration further down the line? And so that's where everything had broken down in her story, and where we had to work to rebuild that trust and to try and get her husband back to the negotiation table, because at that stage he was just refusing to engage with her. And so we had to fix the mistakes basically that had been made very early on, which can be very difficult, isn't always successful. And the best approach is always not to make those mistakes to start with. So ideally, Emily would have come to see me before any of that had happened. Thankfully, we managed to work together to get her husband back on board and to actually negotiate an agreement. And she managed to do that pretty much over the kitchen table with a little bit of help from a mediator. And it cost a tenth of what she'd spent so far. And she was able to divorce within just a few weeks. So this is just an example of some of the mistakes that we can make when we're ill-informed and when we're not surrounded by the right professionals. So let's move on to the heart of the matter today. So we're talking about three main considerations to think of when you're debating which country to get divorced in. The first one, and hopefully that's a pretty obvious one, but the problem is that a lot of people stop here, is to inquire about what the law says. So if you have an attachment to several countries, let's say the UK and the US, and you have a choice between those two countries, potentially a choice. The first thing you're going to want to do is to speak to a solicitor or a lawyer in each of those countries. You need to understand how things work in those countries. And in doing that, you're going to see that the lawyers are going to give you advice very much based on the, because of course that's what they do and it makes absolute sense. So they'll be able to tell you, in our country, you're likely to end up more or less with this. It might be more advantageous to you than in the other country because, for example, the US favors women over men, or they favor the lower income parent over the other, those kind of things. I'm making up that example, but they're going to tell you what the law says and which country might give you the best outcomes. Now, the tendency is to say, well, that's all I need to know. Where am I going to get the best deal? And of course, that's really important. You want to make sure that you're going to be divorcing in a country that's going to be leaning towards your case. That being said, it's not the only thing that you need to inquire about. So, of course, you want to understand, first of all, if you can divorce in each of those countries, if you have a case to file in those countries, but also what the rules might be. And you also want to understand what the process is in that country. Sorry, not the process, the rules around some of the things that matter to you. So I'll give you an example. In France, a prenup, which is a contrat de mariage, is upheld to the letter. So if you have a prenup, a judge is going to apply exactly what it says. In the UK, in England, in Wales, they will look at that prenup and consider it. They may dismiss it if they don't think that it's solid enough, if they think it's been signed under duress or anything of the sort. But they also are allowed to not use it if they consider that it wasn't a fair agreement. So that prenup isn't going to be applied exactly the way you wrote it up. So for people who have a really strong attachment to their prenup and are very intent on applying it, it might be that they think that France is actually a better country for them to divorce in than the England and Wales. Another big example is financial disclosure. Some countries mandate financial disclosure, so both parties have to divulge all of their finances, provide supporting evidence, and in some countries there's legal implications for lying or omitting to share any information. Other countries barely have that process. They require just a few pieces of paper. Sometimes they require just the people just saying how much they earn. There's more or less scrutiny around that. So again, if you're concerned that your spouse might be hiding money or is going to try to hide money, well, then divorcing in a country like England that has a mandatory financial disclosure process is going to give you a massive advantage and be something that responds to a lot of your concerns. The third example that I'll raise is co-parenting. Some countries presume or start with the basis of 50-50. Then the children spend half of the time with one parent and half of the time with the other parent. Not every country operates in that way. Some countries consider that actually the children should be mostly with the mother, and the father should have alternate weekends potentially, or just smaller amounts of time. So again, you're going to want to check on that based on what you want to do in your family and make sure that the country you're applying in is going to give you the best results with respect to them. So as I said, this is kind of the 101. I think a lot of people think of this element and consider what the law says, and hopefully they take the time to speak to lawyers in each jurisdiction who can help them understand what it would look like in each country. But then what I see is that a lot of people stop there. And that's really where the big mistake is, because there's so much more to consider. Of course, you want to get the best outcomes possible, but you might have other priorities as well. So one element to consider, and then I'll move on to the last one, is what the process itself entails. So I have a lot of clients who come to me and say, actually, my priority is to divorce as fast as possible. I don't even care if I'm going to get the best deal possible. I want it to be as swift as possible. So understanding the timelines in each country. Some countries like England have a built-in waiting period. So in the UK, aside for all the delays that you might have in the court system, even if you had all your court dates, as soon as you could, it's going to take at least 6 to 8 months to get divorced. Some countries have much faster processes. Some have much longer processes. And, in some states in the US and Canada, you have to have been separated for a year to even be able to apply for divorce. So knowing that might actually make a difference in your decision. If Canada is one of the countries where you have an option to divorce, but you have to wait a year, you may say, actually, you know what? I'd rather get divorced somewhere else just because I can do it now. So those are really important considerations, and it's important to not lose track of that as well, and to compare them to also the crude outcome from a legal perspective. The other big element to consider is how much does it cost to get divorced? There's fortunes that come into they're not millions, but they're a couple hundred every time. But there's also the cost of a lawyer. Some countries require you to have a lawyer, others don't. Price of a lawyer, the hourly rate is going to vary tremendously from one country to the other. So what's your budget for your divorce? How much do you want to spend on the actual divorce versus on your life afterwards? And that's another thing to look at in trying to decide which country to get divorced in. Another element is the grounds for divorce. In England and Wales, we have no fault divorce, which means that when you get divorced with somebody, you don't need to prove that anybody's done anything wrong. You just need to prove that the marriage has irretrievably broken. Some countries require a fault. So you have to show that somebody's abandoned the home or has been cheating or was abusive or something along those lines. Again, you need to ask yourself what is most aligned to your situation, to what type of divorce you want to have, to how much conflict you're willing to put up with, etc. If you're trying to have a divorce that's as peaceful as possible, well, no fault divorce is definitely a better approach because it doesn't require finger pointing. Nobody's being held accountable for the breakdown of the marriage. You're just taking stock of the fact that the marriage has broken down and that you now want to be able to move on into divorce. Another thing to consider with regards to the process is the voice of the child. Some countries systematically speak to the children around parenting arrangements. So in Germany, for example, the judge will systematically speak to the child to know what they want or what they would prefer with regards to where they're spending their time between mom and dad or dad and mom and mom. In some countries, like in England, there are organizations like CAFCAS that are in charge of speaking to the children, but they only speak to them if there's a concern. So the voice of the child is much less heard, and they get less of an opportunity to input into the parenting arrangements. So again, if it's something that's really important to you, you may choose a jurisdiction over another based on that kind of factor. And then there's just the practicalities of getting divorced, in country A versus country B. If you're more at ease with the language of country A, that might just be something that is really important to you. And getting divorced in a foreign language is difficult. You're dealing with legal jargon and processes. On top of that, it's a foreign language. It can be really overwhelming. So for some people, that's actually the key to making the decision. They want to get divorced in a country where they understand the culture and they understand the language. And also that means they don't have to go translate all their documents and their communications with their spouse. They've got it right there in the right language. So all that to say that there will be many elements, many more than the ones I've listed even, that need to come into account when you understand what the process looks like in each country. And those may just be more important than the actual outcomes and how much money you might get in country A versus country B. Now, the third element to consider is long-term again. As I said, I do really, really insist on the importance of thinking long-term. But especially if you're an expat and there's a chance you're going to be moving abroad, you're going to have to think about enforcing the terms of your divorce. But unfortunately, people don't realize that doesn't happen automatically. So if you get divorced in England and then you move to France, for example, well, then you're going to have your agreements enforced in France. So for example, if your spouse stops paying child maintenance, you're going to have to deal with the French system because that's where you're living and where the children are living. And you're going to have the English order enforced in France. And that can be quite a process. You need to have a mirror order. You need to then translate into local laws. So some of the arrangements you have potentially come to in England might not be acceptable in French law and it might not work in that jurisdiction. And so you're going to have to then, I guess, for lack of a better word, translate, but it's not the language. You're translating the agreement. You're renegotiating for it to work in the new country within that new jurisdiction. So, needless to say, that if you know you're relocating to your home country, that is a massive advantage for divorcing in your home country, because that's where you're going to be, and that's where you're going to be potentially enforcing the terms of your divorce. In some countries, you can't even get your divorce recognized. So, for example, again in France, you can get divorced in front of a notaire, which is not a judge. And that is a streamlined process that France has put in place to allow people to get divorced faster and without all of the cumbersome process of going to court. The problem is that it's one of the only countries in the world that does that. And some countries, like the US and Germany, don't recognize that as an official divorce. So you're living in France, you're getting divorced in France, you think you're divorced, but actually, if you move to Germany, they don't even see you as divorced. The fact that the recognition of your divorce isn't even there, and forget about the terms and getting anything enforced that if there's a disagreement between you and your ex. So really trying to think ahead. If you know already, that is of course the ideal scenario, if you know where you're going to be living in the long term. But then we also don't always know what's going to happen in our lives, and things happen. But trying to think in the most, I guess, the most logical and the most easy to anticipate way, where are you most likely to be living after the divorce? That again is something to consider, because it will make your life a lot easier if you have divorced in the country where you're living. You don't have to be creating mirror orders or translating your divorce into local. So just as a quick recap, hopefully I haven't gone into too much detail, but there's three main takeaways really from today. First of all, take your time to do your research. Speak to professionals, definitely to lawyers, but you could potentially speak to other professionals as well, because you might need to know, for example, if you can remortgage a house or sell a house, that kind of thing. Find out what happens in each country. Get the information I just talked about. Gather that information as soon as possible so that you can put all the facts on the table and make a decision. Now, the decision is not always going to be black and white. Sometimes it's going to be like, oh, well, this one has this that I really like, and this jurisdiction allows me to do that I really like. You're going to have to make a decision, but at least you'll be looking at it from a factual perspective. The second takeaway is to speak to professionals. Seek out professionals who are specialized in international divorce, whether it's your coach, your mediator, your lawyer. Make sure they understand international divorce, because they will know some of the common pitfalls and they will be able to help you to avoid them. And then the third element is to just take your time to really consider all the elements. You will possibly be pushed by some people to move quickly based on some of the considerations, in particular based on what the law says, but that might not be the right decision for you. And if it doesn't feel like it's aligned to your values, or if it doesn't feel like it's the right approach for you, do not get pushed into filing in a country that doesn't work for you. It is your decision. Provided you have the choice from a legal standpoint to file in either country, you need to think about what you want your relationship to look like with your ex later on. What kind of divorce experience you want to have, what kind of money you want to spend, how long you want to take. That is your decision. Sometimes getting the most out of your ex isn't really the objective. So make sure you don't get pushed in that direction if that's not what matters most to you. So really, if you're somebody who's just confused around which jurisdiction to file in, that's when you would come to somebody like me. Similarly, if you're worried about making the wrong decision, then you would come to somebody like me to help you look at all those facts, evaluate the different elements, and make an informed decision. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, because that's quite a common feeling during divorce, there's a lot to think about, a lot of decisions to be made. If it just feels like there's too much to think about and it's becoming just a brain fog at this stage, working with a coach can help you pick things apart, break it down into small pieces, and try and see the picture much more clearly, so that you can make decisions comfortably and without having regrets later on. So before I wrap up, I wanted to offer you this special offer that I am offering through this masterclass, only for people who have attended it. And this is an offer that I'm making available for a short period of time. So it's only between now and Friday. The requirement to benefit from the offer is to book a discovery call. So you can go on my website or you can scan this QR code. If you book a discovery call before Friday, the call does not need to have happened before Friday. You just need to have booked it before then. And in the comments section, you enter the code Expat offer. And I know you've attended this course, and I will give you a discount. And the discount that I'm offering is actually really generous this week. I'm offering you £200 off your first bundle of 9 sessions. So after that first free call, where we will discuss your situation and I'll be able to explain how I can help, if you decide to proceed, I will offer you £200 off your bundle of 9 hours, and you can take advantage of that right away. All you need to do is enter that code expat offer in the comments box when you're booking the discovery call. And then cherry on top of the cake, I'm also offering you access to my free long distance co-parenting plan, which is something that you may not need just now as you're deciding on the jurisdiction, but you're very likely to need later. So if there's a chance that you and your ex are going to be living in different countries at some point, this template is really where you want to be documenting your arrangements, because it makes sure that you've thought of everything and that you haven't forgotten any element that's going to lead to conflict later on. So to get your £200 off and access to the free guide, all you need to do is book a free discovery call, no strings attached, take 30 minutes to chat, and you can proceed however you want. But if you do choose to proceed, you'll also have the added bonus of the £200 off in 3 hours. For those who don't have my information, this is my website, thedivorceandseparationcoach.com. I urge you to go on it, even if you're not planning on booking a discovery call, because there are tons and tons of resources absolutely free on there. I host a weekly podcast with different professionals. There are articles, videos, a whole bunch of resources that you can access at your fingertips, including specific sections on expat divorce. And you can inform yourself and do exactly what I recommended you do: gather information and do your due diligence. If you do want to proceed, you can book a call through using the QR code I showed you before, or just drop me an email. It's Chloe at thedivorceandseparationcoach.com. Send me a text message, a WhatsApp message. You've got my phone number here. Don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm always happy to have a chat, to understand what you're doing and where you're at in your process. I can explain to you what I do and how that fits in with your situation. If I'm not the right person to support you, I can orient you to somebody else. The idea is that we're getting you help and you're getting professional support to make sure that you're not relying on hearsay and information that you hear, that you see on social media. Thank you all very much. Have a lovely day, and I hope to speak to you all very soon. Take care.